The knock came like a rifle shot. It was deep winter, deep in a way that made bones grind and silence stretch out like a dying animal's last breath. Wind screamed down the drawer like a freight train with no tracks, no reason, just blind fury. Snow slapped against the log walls, creaking under its weight. Inside the cabin, the fire was nearly out. The man was down to half a biscuit and the dregs of salted elk, and the last thing he expected, after 2 months without seeing another soul, was a knock on that door. He didn't answer right away, just sat there, boots braced against the cold floor, eyes squinting toward the noise like it was a hallucination. He'd seen men go mad out here. He'd watched them talking to trees, to ghosts, to the flames. Sometimes the snow whispered things if you listened too long, but this knock wasn't a whisper. It came again. He stood slowly. The Winchester was already in his hand. He didn't recall grabbing it. The man was known as Hatch. Nobody called him Mr. Anything. If you knew him at all, you didn't say his name more than once. He had built this cabin by hand 2 winters ago, and for nearly 8 months of each year, he didn't speak to another living person. He liked it that way. Or maybe he just couldn't bear any other way. His shoulder pressed against the thick door, ears straining, no voice, no second noise. Then just as he started to believe it was nothing more than storm-rattled wood, another knock, slower, weaker. He lifted the latch. What he saw didn't fit into his world. 2 women stood there, soaked nearly through, veiled in shawls rimed with frost, lips blue, eyes wide and locked on his face like whatever was behind them in the dark woods was worse than anything a man might do. One was older, mid-30s, with wind-burned cheeks and something raw about her that told him she'd seen death recently. The other was younger, maybe 20. Her arms were wrapped tight around a small bundle of blankets, and Hatch knew before she even unwrapped it. A baby, too small, too quiet. "Please," the older woman said, "we were told you lived up this way. They said you'd have fire. We've nowhere else." He didn't speak. She looked like she'd expected that. Her eyes darted past him toward the hearth, the faint orange of dying coals. "I know what you built this place for," she added. "But please, just until dawn." Hatch didn't step back, didn't move, just looked past them into the swirling snow, half expecting something else to come out of that darkness. Wolves, men, debt, ghosts. Nothing came. He let them in. They stumbled past him without a word more, and he latched the door behind them. The younger one sank to the floor before the hearth and began rubbing her baby's fingers, murmuring softly. The older woman remained standing, her eyes never leaving him. "What happened to you?" he finally asked. Voice like gravel poured into a rusty tin cup. The older woman blinked. She sat down on the stool nearest the wall, wrapped her arms around herself, and didn't answer for a long while. Then, "We left town 3 nights ago. The wagon broke through the ice yesterday. We've been walking since. Annie's husband died first snow. Mine stayed behind." "Stayed?" Hatch asked. Her eyes met his. "Drunk." He didn't press. "Do you have food?" the younger one whispered, suddenly looking up. "For the baby. Please, anything. I can nurse him, but I haven't eaten in 2 days. Hatch moved to the shelf, pulled down the last 3 biscuits, took a strip of the nearly grey elk meat, handed them over without ceremony. The younger one wept. Hatch went to the hearth, knelt, and fed the coals, threw on another log from the dwindling pile. That pile was meant to last until March. It was now barely January. "I didn't build this place to take in folks," he muttered. The older woman nodded. "We know." They didn't ask his name. They didn't thank him. Just sat, shivering, watching the flames start to dance again. For hours, nothing else was said. He gave them each a blanket. They curled in opposite corners, keeping the baby between them. Hatch sat by the window with his rifle, listening to the wind and staring at the door, feeling that old feeling in his gut again, like he'd made a mistake just by opening it. But that baby made a small sound in the night, the kind of noise that reminded you there were still things worth protecting. Hatch didn't sleep, but he didn't throw them out either. Morning was slow to arrive, masked by thick snow clouds. The storm had gotten worse. "Can't go out in that," Hatch said. The older woman glanced up. "We're not trying to stay, but we don't want to die either." He looked at her. "Names?" She hesitated. "I'm June. That's Clara. Her boy's name is Henry." "Too cold to move," Hatch said again, mostly to himself. June stood. "We can help. Chop wood. Cook. Anything." Hatch raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" She nodded. "And I can mend. I saw your sleeves split." He looked down. It was. "You'll earn your food," he said, standing. Clara looked at him with such a soft kind of gratitude. It made his stomach twist. He didn't like it. He didn't like the feeling of being seen as safe. That was the start of too many bad things. That day passed slow and silent. June mended clothes by the fire. Clara did her best to cook something with the little there was. Henry was quiet but warm now, thanks to the fire and biscuits. Hatch stayed near the window, watching. That night the wind screamed louder, and someone else knocked. The sound hit them all like a bell toll. Clara gasped. June went pale. trail. Hatch stood fast. "One of yours?" he asked June. She shook her head quickly. "No, we came alone. I swear it." Hatch grabbed his rifle. Another knock. No voice. This time he didn't ask questions. He threw on his coat and opened the door without warning. But no one was there. Only tracks. Big ones. Heavy boots. They led away into the woods. And a message carved into the snowbank. Crude and wet and half melted by wind, but still clear. "You took what's mine." Hatch stared at the words. June came to his side. She saw it too, and she said nothing for a long time. Then quietly, "I told you, my husband stayed behind." But Hatch could hear the fear in her voice. Not the fear of a man lost to whiskey. The fear of one who might have followed. And the snow kept falling. The tracks stayed visible all day. Hatch spent the morning circling the cabin with his rifle cradled in one arm, his boots crunching through the frost-hard crust of the upper snow. Those tracks didn't lead far. No more than 30 yards out, they curved into the trees and vanished like a trick of the wind. No return prints, no sign of camp, but he'd seen it before. Men walking backwards to hide their trail. Men who knew how to sleep in snow pits and wait for the wrong moment. Back inside, he said nothing to June and Clara. Just sat by the fire longer than usual, eyes hard. He took apart his rifle twice, checked the axe blades, moved the firewood indoors. "I thought you didn't want company," June said quietly, glancing at the weapons. "I don't," he replied. Clara didn't speak. She was holding the baby so close now, she barely let him move. The storm pressed on. Every hour the air felt heavier. By noon the wind had dipped, but that didn't calm Hatch. It meant visibility had gone up. For anyone watching, now was a good time to move. He finally asked June again. "You said your husband stayed behind?" "I did." "Why?" She sat on the edge of the cot, elbows on knees, hands folded tight. "Because he thought we were a burden. He said if we wanted to go freeze, we could do it without him." "He let you leave in a blizzard?" Her lips tightened. "He didn't care much what happened to us anymore." "Didn't," Hatch repeated. Past tense? June finally looked him in the eye. "I don't know if he's alive or dead, but I wouldn't put it past him to come looking just to remind us we still belong to him." Clara's eyes welled, but she said nothing. They all heard the sound that night, metal dragging across wood. It was after dark. The snow had died down, but the clouds hung thick over the hills, and the sky pulsed faintly with that pale, sour glow that came before ice storms. Hatch had just stoked the fire when it happened, an unmistakable shriek of something sharp grinding along the cabin's far wall. Clara dropped the baby. June screamed. Hatch was up like a spring, rifle cocked, finger already tensing. Another drag, closer, long. It made the window shutters vibrate, then silence. He turned to June. "That wall's your side," she nodded, heart in her throat. Clara rushed to the baby, who was miraculously unhurt, just stunned from the fall. He started crying, loud and desperate. Hatch hissed for quiet and dropped to one knee by the door. No more noise came. He threw open the door. Nothing, not even tracks this time. The snow was too fresh, but something had passed. Too close, too deliberate. He could feel it in the air, the same way a trapper knows when he's being watched. When he came back in, June met his eyes. He never liked to be left. For 2 more days the weather held them prisoner. No one dared venture far, not with the baby still coughing and the food down to scraps. Hatch rationed the remaining elk into small pieces soaked in broth. June boiled pine needle tea. Clara barely moved from the hearth, clutching Henry like if she let go, someone might reach through the wall and take him. On the 3rd day, Hatch found new tracks, circling now, closer each time, and under the cabin window, a smear of something that looked a lot like blood. No animal prints nearby. He returned inside with his mouth in a hard line. "Pack your things," he said. Clara blinked. "We have no things." "Then get warm and hold tight." June stood. "Where are we going?" "We're not, but I am. I'm tracking him before he tracks us closer." Hatch didn't say goodbye. He never did. Just shouldered the rifle, slipped on his snow cloak, and stepped out into the storm-glazed trees. The world beyond the cabin felt quieter now, not because the wind had stopped, but because something else had taken its place, like the land itself was holding its breath. He followed the newest tracks. They weren't subtle anymore. They were deep, fast, purposeful. Whoever it was had been close, maybe within 50 feet of the cabin wall. The tracks led up toward the ridge, past the trapline Hatch hadn't touched in a week, and into the old pine stretch that never got full sun, a place no man should be walking through in deep winter, unless he had nowhere else, or unless he knew it by heart. Hours passed. He found a tree with stripped bark, then an old fire pit, still warm. Nearby, a half-buried flask. He pulled it out and uncorked it. Whiskey, strong. He sniffed once, nodded to himself, and kept going. The woods up this high didn't like strangers. Even Hatch, who'd lived with them for 2 years, walked differently once the light changed. Everything here moved slower. but with more purpose. You didn't make sound unless you meant to, and you didn't look behind you unless you were ready to see something. By dusk, he found the shack. It wasn't more than a hole in the side of a rock face, camouflaged with branches, shielded by wind, a hunter's post maybe, but inside was fresh ash. A rabbit being skinned, and hanging from the crossbeam, a woman's scarf, June's. Hatch didn't panic, not his way. He backed out slow, moved 50 yards south, climbed a ridge, and sat there till the light dropped behind the far peaks. He watched, waited, then he saw him, a man, hunched, broad-shouldered, trudging through the trees like he knew every route by name. He walked like he wasn't cold at all. Hatch raised his rifle, watched through the scope. The man walked right past his old boot trail, right toward the cabin. Hatch exhaled and didn't fire, not yet. Back at the cabin, June felt it. She stood from the cot and moved to the window, pulled the heavy curtain aside, and peered out into the dusk. "Do you see him?" Clara whispered behind her. June didn't answer. "I don't want him to take Henry," Clara said again. June turned, tears in her eyes. "He's not after Henry. He wants something else." "What?" June shook her head. "I don't know, but he's not drunk. He's not mad. He's something worse now." She moved to the table, picked up Hatch's hunting knife, and tucked it under her shawl. The knock came again, this time slow, rhythmic. Clara froze. June stepped forward. "Don't make a sound," she whispered. Another knock, not rushed, not begging, just calm, like he was knocking to ask for coffee. June moved to the door. "June," Clara begged, but June didn't stop. She unlaced the latch and opened the door just a crack. There he stood, James, her husband. Only he wasn't the same. His face was raw from the wind, eyes sunk deep like he hadn't slept in weeks. His beard was half frozen to his chest, and he smelled like sweat and wood smoke and something older, something rotten beneath. "June," he said. She didn't speak. "I came to bring you back." She shut the door. He didn't stop it, just let it close. Then he leaned against it. "You can shut me out, June, but this place was never meant for you." She backed away, heart thudding. He whispered through the wood, "This place is for men like me." Then silence. 10 seconds later, the glass of the far window shattered inwards. James was inside before either woman screamed, but so was Hatch. The rifle cracked once, deafening in the small space. James reeled, but he didn't fall. He charged. Hatch grabbed the burning log from the hearth and slammed it across the man's face. The smell of scorched beard and flesh filled the room. James howled finally, an animal's sound. June screamed, "The baby!" Clara darted across the floor and grabbed Henry just before James's boot stomped where he'd been. Hatch raised the rifle again, but James had kicked it from his grip. Now they were chest to chest, and Hatch, built like stone, fought like a bear. But James didn't tire, didn't bleed. He grinned, eyes black. It wasn't whiskey in him anymore. Something else had grown there during the snow. Something that didn't want wives back. Something that just hated being left behind. They crashed into the table. Wood splinters flew. June rushed forward, stabbed the knife into James's shoulder. He didn't even flinch, but the distraction was enough. Hatch grabbed the hot iron poker from the fire and drove it through James's side. This time, he screamed, a real scream. He fell back, stumbled, and slammed into the wall. Hatch didn't wait. He shoved open the door, kicked the man's body out into the snow, and slammed it shut again, bolted it. James lay there outside, breathing shallow, then slowly rolled over and vanished into the trees. Inside, no one spoke. The baby cried softly. The fire cracked. Clara held Henry like he was the last warm thing in the world. June sank to the floor. Hatch leaned against the door, breathing like he'd run 50 miles. "He's not dead," June said. Hatch nodded. "No." "What do we do now?" Clara whispered. Hatch's eyes went to the rifle, then to the woods, then back to the fire, and he said, "We wait." The next morning brought no sign of James, but his absence was worse than presence. A dead man rots. A dead man doesn't walk back again, but one who disappears into the trees after being run through with a fire poker. One who smiles while bleeding and drags himself back into the woods without a word. That's the kind of man who waits, the kind who plans. Hatch didn't say any of this aloud, but June saw it in the way he moved, checking the rifle more often, stacking the wood tighter against the wall, bracing the back door with a crossbeam he'd never used before. He was preparing not for a blizzard, but a siege. "I knew he'd come," June whispered that afternoon, hands trembling over the tin pot of rabbit broth. Clara looked up from the baby, who was still pale, still barely feeding. "I thought maybe we got far enough," June went on. "But he always said he'd never let us go, said if I left, he'd burn down the mountains behind me." Clara didn't answer. She hadn't said much since the window shattered. The baby cried less, and that worried her more than when he'd screamed. Hatch came inside carrying his traps, empty again. No game had touched his lines in 4 days. Not a rabbit, not a fox, not even tracks. He'd hunted these hills a long time, and he knew what it meant. Predators were near, and not just one. That night, Clara woke screaming. June sat bolt upright, fumbling for her. "What is it?" Hatch barked. "The baby!" Clara gasped, heart pounding. "He was gone! I saw him! He was gone!" She clawed at the blanket until she found Henry again, right there in her arms, still sleeping, still warm. June touched her shoulder. "A dream!" "No," Clara breathed. "He was in the doorway, holding him." "James?" Hatch said. Clara nodded slowly. "He didn't say a word, just looked at me, smiled, and held Henry like he was his." The next day, Hatch found something new. The rope he used to anchor his wood sled had been untied. Not cut, untied. Knots done with precision, undone with even more. He turned slowly, watching the tree line. The sun was out now, but weak. It did nothing to warm the air. He crouched low by the sled, stared at the snow, and saw no tracks again, but a single length of twine had been left beside the tree stump, tied into a loop, like a noose. He didn't bring it inside. He burned it. Clara stopped speaking altogether. Her face grew pale, her fingers stiff. She rocked Henry constantly now, even when he slept. Hatch had seen this kind of freezing before, not from snow, but from fear. Sometimes people went quiet before they broke. June did her best to keep things alive inside the cabin. She mended Hatch's shirts, stirred the tea, kept the fire tended, but even her strength began to buckle. "I'm scared of what he's become," she said once, barely a whisper. Hatch didn't answer. He just stared at the fire. "He's not the same. No one is after being left to the dark long enough," Hatch finally said. 3 more days, no storm, no James, no visitors. Then came the fire. Hatch had been outside, checking his rabbit snares, still empty when he saw it. Smoke on the southern ridge, black, oily, moving fast. He ran back, breath hammering, rifle bouncing on his back. June met him at the door, frantic. "Clara's not well. Henry has a fever." He brushed past. "Get water. We might have minutes." He bolted the door, shoved furniture against it, grabbed a blanket and soaked it. "What is it?" June called out, already filling the washpot. "They're trying to smoke us out," he growled. The smoke came thick and fast. It wasn't just burning wood. Something worse. Tar, maybe. Grease. Whatever it was, it clung to the lungs and made Henry cry until he gasped for air. Hatch ran back outside, threw snow over the eaves, kicked snowdrifts over the cabin base to choke the crawl vents. It helped a little, but it told him something else. James wasn't alone anymore. That night, Hatch kept watch. All night, he sat in the far window, eyes trained on the trees, and sometime near dawn, he saw it, not James. 3 men, standing in a line at the edge of the trees, still as death. No torches, no coats, just waiting. Then one by one they turned and walked away. "I have to go," Hatch said the next morning. June stood. "What?" "They're watching us, testing us, seeing what we'll do. They're waiting for something. I'm not going to wait for it." "You're going to find them?" "I'm going to cut them off before they think we're ready to die." He left with a pack and a hatchet, left June with the rifle, the baby swaddled on Clara's lap, and a hard look in his eye that said, "Don't open that door for anyone but me." Then he vanished into the snow. June kept watch, for hours, days maybe. Time bled. Clara's lips went blue. The baby burned with fever. Still, no sound, no knocks, no fire, just cold. Then, 2 nights later, Hatch returned. But he was limping. His right hand was red, wrapped in strips of his shirt. He didn't say a word until June dragged him inside, bolted the door, and sat him by the fire. "What happened?" she whispered. "Trap," he muttered. "Snare line. I didn't see it. Snapped back on me. Meant for game. Or maybe not. Did you find them?" He looked up. Only bones. He'd found a camp, empty, signs of recent use, and a pit with ashes that still held heat. And beside it, a pile of bones, animal and human mixed. A woman's scarf, another bundle of baby blankets. June turned white. "They're not just following us," Hatch said quietly. "They're feeding off it." They didn't sleep that night. June sat with the rifle across her knees. Clara barely breathed. Hatch sharpened the hatchet by the fire until the edge gleamed silver, and in the dark, outside the shuttered windows, came a sound none of them would ever forget. A lullaby, soft, sung in a woman's voice, but no woman could be heard walking through that deep snow, and the words weren't clear. "But the tune," Clara sobbed. "That's my song. That's the one I sing to Henry." Hatch opened the door before anyone could stop him. He didn't see her, but he saw a bundle in the snow. It was another child's blanket, still warm, still breathing. He pulled it up. Inside, a doll, hand-stitched, with a tuft of dark hair sewn into the scalp. It looked like Henry, exactly like Henry. He threw it into the fire. Clara screamed. June clutched the baby to her chest, sobbing, and out in the trees came a laugh. Low, male, James. "I know you're in there," the voice boomed. "You've got my family." Hatch raised the rifle. "You think you're strong, stranger?" James called out. "But this land doesn't belong to the strong. It belongs to the alone." June stood. "No," she said, and walked to the door. "June," Hatch warned, but she opened it. James stood there, no coat, no boots, snow swirling around his bare chest, like he didn't feel it at all. "Come back," he said softly. "This is where I belong now," June whispered. James smiled, and something shifted behind his eyes. He stepped forward, and Hatch pulled the trigger. The shot hit James' center chest. He dropped, hard. The snow drank the blood without steam. June gasped. Clara screamed. But Hatch didn't lower the gun. Not yet. They watched long into the night. But James didn't move again, and for the first time in days, the trees were quiet. Still, like something had been uninvited. That morning, Hatch dragged the body out to the ridge and buried it under a cairn of stones. He said nothing, and when he came back, he found June asleep by the hearth, Clara singing gently again, and Henry's fever finally broken. But the woods still watched, and he knew it, because the cabin he built to be alone, it wasn't alone anymore, and maybe it never had been. The snow softened after James died. It didn't melt, not yet, but it stopped howling. The wind that had once shrieked through the trees now whispered low, like a thing exhausted from the fight. Hatch noticed it first, standing out by the stacked woodpile at dawn, his breath thick in the air, the rifle slung over one shoulder. No fresh prints, no shadows between the trees, no tricks in the snow. He stared into the pine line for a long time that morning, waiting for a shape to move, a face to appear, or a sound to break the silence. But none came. Back inside, June was folding a clean cloth for Clara's forehead. The young widow was sick now, proper sick, her lips chapped, her hands like blue porcelain, her hair damp with cold sweat. She hadn't spoken since Hatch dragged James's body into the hills. She barely blinked, just rocked Henry gently and hummed. Always the same tune, over and over, like if she stopped, the air might collapse around her. "Still no game," Hatch muttered, throwing down the empty snares. "We'll run out soon," June said softly. "4 biscuits left. The last bit of elk. I think the tea's stretching more bark than pine now." Hatch didn't respond. He peeled off his coat, his hands trembling slightly from cold and fatigue, and went to the hearth. "I'll go further tomorrow," he said half to himself. "You shouldn't go alone again," June said. "I built this cabin to be alone," Hatch replied without thinking. June turned, slowly. "You're not." That night the fire popped loud. Too loud. Hatch snapped awake, hand instantly on the rifle. June hadn't moved, but her eyes were open. Clara was slumped near the fire. Henry clutched tight to her chest. She didn't stir even when the log burst in the coals. Then Hatch heard it again, not from inside, but under, below the floorboards, a scratching, like claws or nails. He moved slow, quiet. June followed with the oil lamp, casting a glow that made the shadows stretch long and mean. They stepped around Clara, careful not to wake her. Hatch crouched by the cornerboard near the hearth, pulled at it. The floorboard groaned, then lifted. He handed June the rifle, held the lamp. Beneath the cabin was a crawl space, not deep, just enough to store roots and maybe keep potatoes from freezing. Hatch rarely went under there. It always felt colder than the rest of the place. He lowered the lamp, eyes squinted. The space was dark, damp, empty. He exhaled once, then froze. There, at the far end, a boot, just one, tattered leather, and beside it, scratches, fresh, into the post supports, deep gouges like someone had clawed upward, trying to come through the floor. He closed it fast, nailed it shut. In the morning, Clara was worse. She wasn't speaking, wasn't drinking. Her eyes fluttered like someone half caught in a dream she couldn't claw her way out of. And Henry, quiet, too quiet. June tried to nurse broth into her friend's lips. Hatch watched from the corner. "She won't last like this," June whispered. "She's not gone yet," Hatch said, "but something's got hold of her," June said, shaking her head. "It's not just the cold." They heard the whimpering near dusk. Not Clara, not Henry, outside, near the trees. A woman's voice, sobbing, calling a name. "Henry?" June shot upright. I know," Hatch said. He threw on his coat, took the hatchet, left the rifle with June, then walked out into the failing light. He followed the sound past the trapline, through the pines, down into the frozen creek bed. It echoed strange here, like the rocks carried voices from far off. "Henry?" He stopped. Something moved up ahead. A figure, woman-shaped, slumped, crawling along the creek wall, one hand outstretched. "Help me," it sobbed. Hatch raised the hatchet. "Please," it cried. He stepped closer. It wasn't June, and it wasn't Clara. The face was wrong, too long, too slack, eyes sunken into deep holes, mouth full of broken teeth. And it wasn't crawling. It was dragging. There were no feet, just a long trail, like it had been pulled forward. He stepped back. It didn't chase. It just smiled. A wet, black smile. Then vanished behind the rock shelf like it was never there. When Hatch returned, the fire was out. Clara was cold, dead. June sat beside her, tears falling. Henry still swaddled and somehow still breathing, weak as he was. "She just stopped," June whispered. No scream, no breath. just stopped. Hatch stood there a long time, then took the baby. His hands were steady now, no more tremble. He laid Henry down in the warmed basket, fed what little broth they had into his lips, then covered him with a quilt he'd once said was for no one but himself. "I'll bury her in the morning," he said, but there was no need, because when dawn came, Clara was gone. Not just her body, gone. No prints, no tracks. No blood, just a circle burned into the floorboards, faint like a scorch from a pot that had sat too long, but there'd been no pot, just her. "Whatever we're fighting," June said softly, "it doesn't end with him." "You mean James?" She shook her head. "I mean the thing that took James." Hatch didn't respond. He just walked to the hearth, knelt, and tore up the floorboards again. This time there was no boot, but the scratches were deeper now. That night they heard Clara's voice outside, singing. June didn't sleep. She sat with Henry in her lap, the rifle across her knees, and the lantern lit till the oil ran low. Hatch sat by the door, silent. By morning they were both still there, still waiting. And in the distance, somewhere behind the last line of trees, the smoke rose again, black, tall, unmoving. The smoke didn't move. For 3 days it stayed rising from the tree line like a warning or a curse, and no wind touched it. Hatch had seen wildfire smoke bend and break across ridges before, even in the cold, but this was something else. The column of soot rose straight into the sky like a black needle, threading through the clouds. He didn't speak much in those days. Neither did June. The cabin had grown too quiet for words, too haunted. Even the floor creaked differently now, lower, heavier, and sometimes, only sometimes, he could feel a thrum beneath the ground, like something pacing beneath them. Henry still lived. That, more than anything, gave Hatch reason to keep the fire lit. The baby was quieter now, but not in a bad way. His fever was gone, his skin no longer clammy or pale. He stared at Hatch with big, unreadable eyes, as if sizing the man up, as if aware that whatever had taken his mother, whatever had crawled beneath the floor, whatever still called his name in the night, hadn't taken him. Not yet. June spoke again on the 4th morning. It was snowing again. Hard, dry snow, the kind that whipped sideways and coated your clothes in seconds. Hatch was cutting through the crust with the hatchet, trying to dig down to the second woodpile he'd buried in October, when June stepped out with Henry wrapped tight to her chest. "I dreamed of the roots again," she said, staring at the trees. Hatch didn't answer, just kept swinging. "There's something beneath us," she said. "It's not just superstition." He paused, wiped his brow with a gloved hand and looked over. June's hair was streaked with frost, her lips cracked, but her eyes were clear now, no longer lost in fear. Whatever had broken inside her when Clara died, it had rebuilt into something harder. "There's something in the trees," she added. "It knew James. It used him, and now it wants Henry." "He's not taking the boy," Hatch said. She nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Then we need to stop waiting." By dusk, they were packing. Not to run, Hatch made that clear. There was no running from a thing that could burn without fire, move without prints, and whisper without breath. They packed to move toward the smoke. "If we sit still, we'll rot like the rest," Hatch muttered, tying off the last of the food bundles. What little was left. He left behind everything he didn't need. The extra coat, the broken snares, the iron pan that hadn't seen fresh meat in weeks. What he kept fit into one pack. 2 biscuits, a length of twine, flint, the small blade, the Winchester with 4 rounds left. He gave June the axe. "You trust me with this?" she asked. "You buried your husband once," he said, "and you stayed after." "I trust that," she nodded. That night Henry didn't cry, not even once. They left before first light, snow nearly to their knees. Sky still dark, air thick with silence. The trees welcomed them with nothing but their stillness. And yet the further they walked, the clearer it became that something was watching. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no creak of branches, just the soft crunch of their boots and the faint breath of Henry from beneath June's shawl. By midday, the smoke was closer. They could smell it now. Not just fire, bone, burnt hair, ashes older than anything they should have been able to smell. They crested the ridge by late afternoon and found the clearing. It wasn't a camp, not anymore. It had been once. Remnants of tents, torn cloth, pots buried in snow, fire pits sunken with black ice. But it had changed. In the center stood a circle of stones, large, smooth, placed with intention. Not a cooking ring, a shrine, something ancient. In the middle of it, tied upright to a tall pine stripped bare, was a body, James, or what was left of him, his arms stretched high, lashed with bark rope, his chest cut open in a spiral, ribs splayed outward, and his eyes, still there, still open, still watching. Behind him, beyond the stones, was the source of the smoke, a black pit in the ground, ringed with scorched snow, and carved markings Hatch didn't recognize. No fire burned inside, but the heat that poured from it was real. The smoke didn't flicker or change. It existed, like a feature of the land. Henry began to cry, soft at first, then louder. Then louder. June clutched him tighter. Shh, baby, please. And then they heard it. From below, a second cry. Same pitch, same voice, exactly the same. Henry froze. His mouth stayed open, but the sound didn't come from him anymore. It came from the pit. Go back, Hatch said suddenly. June didn't argue. She turned, stumbling in the snow, one arm around the child, one hand clutching the axe. But they were already too late. From the trees behind the stones came the others, 4 of them, barefoot, half-dressed, faces smeared in ash and sap, eyes dull and full of hunger. Not for food, but for heat, for soul. One was a woman, hair grey and long. She carried nothing but a doll in her arms, stuffed with moss. One was a boy, no older than Henry, but standing, walking on twisted legs, mouth open in a grin that showed no teeth. Another crawled, the last, taller than Hatch, shoulders bent sideways, head tilted wrong, held something in its hand, a baby's blanket, Clara's. June saw them and screamed. Hatch didn't hesitate. He fired once, hit the tall one in the chest. It didn't stop. He fired again, missed, third shot, into the crawling one's neck. It fell, twitched, started crawling again. June grabbed Hatch's coat. We have to run. We have to go now. No, Hatch said. He handed her the pack. You take Henry. You head west, down the creek. You don't stop. Don't look back. She didn't move. June, he said, voice harder. I built that cabin to be alone. You gave me something better. Don't waste it. I'm not leaving you. You are. He pushed the rifle into her arms. Go. She ran, and Hatch turned back to the pit. He walked straight through the circle. The shapes didn't follow. They watched, as he crossed into the center, as he stood before James's body, as he pulled the hatchet from his belt, as he raised it high and drove it into the pit. The sound that came out wasn't earthly. It wasn't wind or animal or man. It was all of them, screaming from below, from inside. The smoke turned red. The shapes reeled, clawed at their own eyes. The woman with the doll dropped to her knees. The crawling one thrashed in the snow. The tall one fell backward, arms reaching skyward like he was begging something not to leave. And then, silence. Just smoke. June didn't stop until the sun rose. She ran for hours, Henry against her chest, her feet bleeding, her breath like fire. At the tree line above the creek bend, she finally turned and saw no smoke, no figures, just trees and wind and snow. They never found Hatch, not the trappers who came weeks later, not the townsmen who finally followed June's desperate trail back into the hills. They found the cabin, torn open at the roof, blackened by smoke. No bodies, no bones, just 3 deep claw marks along the hearthstone. And a child's doll, handmade, stuffed with moss. They say Hatch walked west through the trees until he found fire again. Some say he became it. Others say he's still out there, sharpening his axe by the old frozen stream, watching the dark parts of the forest the way a man watches a candle near wind. Henry lived. June raised him in a new town, far to the south. She never married again. But sometimes, in the coldest months, she'd put her hand on Henry's back and whisper, "You were almost taken," and he'd nod, because he remembered the cabin, the whispering beneath, the man who gave up being alone so he could save the only thing left worth saving.